Hi, everybody. I'm Ty Taylor. I'm from Seattle, and I made The Bridge and Tumblestone, and I'm here today to share with you some of my experiences with showing it all the damn time. Just as some background, Tumblestone took 3 years to make, and on average, we demoed it about once a month, never going more than 2 months at a time. This was a great way for us to, at least at the start, constantly playtest, constantly iterate on player feedback, and just kind of set milestones for ourselves so we can always have something to work towards in kind of like Scrum, but more as like a let's show people all the time sort of way. Overall, we showed it over 50 different places internationally, from small, tiny little things at bars to giant shows like PAX West, Tokyo Game Show, and what have you. So, like, why did we do all of this? Well, for one, it's just the conventional indie wisdom is that's just what you do if your game is relatively unknown. And so that's kind of why we started doing it, but also the very first time we showed the game, it was 3 months after developing it, and we had no idea if players in 2014 at the time wanted a match 3 competitive puzzle game. It's kind of an SNES genre game, so we wanted to just test the waters. So we brought it to the Indie Mini booth at PAX East just to purely gauge player reaction. And what we saw was players coming to the game, and for the first time, we saw people having fun with it. They kept coming back. They brought their friends. They were laughing. They were yelling at each other. Like it was an incredible, incredible experience to see someone reacting that way to the game we made. So we ended up spending the next 3 years of our life working on a game that, at the time, I guess we were ready to abandon if it didn't work out. So for the first year or so of exhibiting all the time, we used this as valuable playtesting. There are so many game modes of Tumblestone that ended up getting cut because I'm like, this is maybe interesting or cool. Let's test it out in front of people. And if they hate it, then we cut it, and we often did. Or it let us refine the game modes that we already were playing with and liked a lot. It was a great way to just connect into the industry. It's how I met a lot of people in this room, was from showing Tumblestone at like different exhibits and conventions. It's also a way that I met a lot of publishers and platform representatives, and just I guess very important people to know in the industry was by meeting them on show floors of PAX or wherever. And finally, at least for the latter half of the development and the expo cycle, it was all about marketing, talking to press, getting the emails of thousands of gamers eventually, just so we can reach out to them at launch, and just driving that super, super hard. I've made this chart to kind of illustrate what I liked to get out of showcasing. And there's a lot of different venues you can go to, and a lot of different audiences that you might be talking to, from gamers who will likely buy games on Steam or consoles, press who might write about your game or stream it or whatever they do, contacts at Xbox or publishers or anything like that, or just literally random people who don't play games and just walk in because the event is free and it looks interesting, and attendance in a broad spectrum of what you might be showing in front of. For playtesting, I really only found that audiences, smaller audiences, less than 200 people at a show, was the most valuable playtesting. Anytime you got to an event like PAX, where there's something like 70,000 people, everyone is too fatigued from going from game to game. There's too much content to see. They're not, I guess, valuable enough to be able to sit down and get good feedback from, unless you have sufficiently large number of teammates at your booth. But even then, the mindset of a PAX goer is not quite there. It's much better to have like a more quiet environment where you can sit down next to them and like see what they're thinking, ask them what they're thinking, and write down lots and lots of notes. And coming from both gamers and random people especially, just like is a great way to test UX, just to see like, this is where the menu is. This is obviously where the menu is. Why don't they get this? But gamers obviously get it right away. As for marketing, it doesn't really matter the size of the expo. Anytime you see a press person, like at PAX, they all have a yellow badge. I want to immediately go and be their friend. Here's my business card. Give me yours. Like, let me tell you about my game. Are you busy? Let's reschedule or something. Like, talk to every single press person I could find. But as for marketing directly to gamers, it really only mattered, I suppose, or was worth my time and effort if there was a sufficiently large number of people. Yes, if there's like less than 5,000 people, 1 or 2 people might buy it, but it's not really worth the effort of setting up a booth unless you're really going to have a mass appeal, like with something at the Indie Mega booth. And much like with press, for any networking, anyone who you meet at something at a convention, whether it's local or international, or like a GDC or something here in Vancouver, there's a lot of people who go to these who could one day be important to you, whether they're like a platform representative or a publisher or like just someone from Full Indie Summit who asked you to come up on stage and talk about exhibiting. And finally, just for the team morale, it didn't matter how many people or who was playing. Anytime we saw someone like playing our game and truly enjoying themselves and coming back, it made months or years of development completely worthwhile. It makes you feel like a rock star. So as for like the actual way we set up our booth, I'm gonna go through some notes that might be obvious, but I think are absolutely worth pointing out and reiterating. It needs to be absolutely as attractive as possible. If you go to a major convention like PAX, there are hundreds of games. And I always go through like even the mega booth and see games that look kind of bland and unattractive and no one's there, and I feel really bad for the developer who could have gone through an extra effort just to make it have bright colors or decorate it or something to draw people in. I also recommend putting branding everywhere. With Tumblestone, we literally had the Tumblestone logo large, heavily readable, everywhere, above the TVs, during the demo, signs everywhere on business cards. The last thing I ever wanted was for someone to like play the game, leave PAX, and be like, man, that competitive puzzle game was really good. What was it called? No, I want them to remember Tumblestone was really good so they could look it up later and wishlist it. And that was super important for us. It was really important to make sure the TVs were raised up enough so that the audience could have as much fun watching as the players were having fun playing the game. That drew a crowd much better than any other strategy. And having a crowd is so important. I'll talk about that more later, but just having a crowd brings more players in, it makes them want to play, it cues people up to playing, and it just makes the booth run so much more smoothly. We printed off thousands and thousands of business cards that basically just have a picture of the game so people remember what the gameplay is, obviously the title of the game and the email and the Twitter and the website and everything, just so they could take it back later. After seeing hundreds of games at a show, it's really important to have that tangible piece to look at your bag and be like, oh yeah, Tumblestone, I remember that. I'm gonna go follow it on Twitter or something. And similarly, we collected a lot of emails so that we can send a day one blast to everyone who signed up, and having these at the edges of our booth for easy access was really important. My favorite booth that we've done over the 50 plus things that we've set up was at one of the PAXs, and it was because we fought tooth and nail for a corner booth at the mega booth, which is super important. Don't be sandwiched in the middle if you can help it. Giving you access to 2 aisleways. And it's a relatively small booth, 3 square meters. But we set up 2 TVs, which has room for 4 players each, has plenty of room for people in the audience watching and wanting to play, has room for me being trapped in the corner surrounded by people explaining the game twice to at once. We also set up a private press demo. So any VIP press that we saw or scheduled meetings with, we could sneak into the back of our booth and have like a really private sit-down talk with them. Like, let's go through some of the more advanced features of the game and not have them be like surrounded by people. It also was nice to have an escape route so I could easily sneak from one end of the booth to the other without actually having to go through the horde of people around it. Like I mentioned, we had email sign-up forms on the far edges, so even if someone didn't want to or didn't have time to play the game but was still interested in giving us our email, they could. And next to the email forms, plenty of cards and a plate full of cookies. I've given away over 10,000 cookies. We did this cookies for email gimmick where we basically just had our laptop set out with an email sign-up form and a sign that said cookies for emails, smiley face, and set out a plate full of cookies that we bought in bulk from Safeway. And it was hugely effective. We got thousands and thousands of emails for people promising only a single email at launch, because I personally don't want spam. I don't want to be on your mailing list, but I do want one email when you're out, because I am actually interested in your game. And so that's kind of what we did. We sent a single email only. And just as a pro tip, never ever collect emails on a piece of paper. My God, transcribing chicken scratch handwriting like weeks before you launch so you can send out emails is, use a tablet or a laptop. One of the core principles of the booth design was maximizing throughput. And by this, I mean just getting the game into the hands of as many people as possible, getting them actually playing it. And simply doing this by having as many demo stations as you can cram into your small booth. Like we had 2 full-size TVs, but we're also fortunate enough to have Intel sponsor us with several tablets, so that where if the crowd was large enough, we just took tablets with Tumblestone loaded on the arcade modes and handed them out into the crowd and had them play as well if we were sufficiently staffed at our booth. Just to get as many people playing it as possible. It also helped to have a really short and sweet demo, one with a very well-defined end that was very, very cleanly ended. Be like, yes, thank you for playing, now move aside so we can get another group of people in. Our demo was about 3 to 4 minutes for all 4 people to play. So overall, our throughput at PAX was about 2 players per minute on average throughout the entire show, which equates to over 2,000 people actually playing the game in a 4-day period at PAX, which is a lot of people to actually play the game and give all this information to. It's important to nail the flow of a booth, and by this I mean finding someone maybe just walking down the expo hall, telling them about your game, telling them how to play, having them have a good time, and then exiting them in a smooth way that your other teammates also are doing this at the same time to eventually get your booth kind of running like clockwork. And for me personally, the hardest part about running a booth is just talking to strangers. Someone's like walking down an aisleway at PAX and like they look bored, they might be on their way somewhere, they might look disinterested, and I'm like, hey, do you want to try Tumblestone? There's an open controller, it only takes 3 or 4 minutes. I've said this tens of thousands of times in my life to random people who were like, I guess, what is it? And so I needed to nail the elevator pitch. So by the time I see them in the aisleway and walk them to the booth, I have nailed down the elevator pitch for the game. They know exactly what they're getting themselves into. And so by the time I hand them a controller, hopefully the game can explain itself if I'm busy, but I can also start talking about the game and they can just start playing it. But once they're done, once the demo comes to a natural end, it's really important to have an exit pitch as well. Just immediately tell them everything they might possibly ask, which are, when's the game coming out? Or in our case, when we incorrectly thought the game was coming out over and over again. Where they could get it, which is us again over-promising. Selling merch. We sold t-shirts and Steam keys simply for Tumblestone. And after they play your game and have an amazing time, this is the perfect time to sell them the game. Like, you can buy it right now. It's not coming out for another year. You can buy it right now on this Steam key. And that usually paid back the cost of the booth, because that was by far the best time just to sell them a $10 Steam key. And again, collecting emails for that one-time blast. Even if they bought a key, like, we can email you a reminder in case you want it on consoles or something. So, having a good demo build. For starters, don't let players change settings or exit the game, because I found that if players can change settings for whatever fucking reason, they will. Basically, don't have any way for one player's demo experience to affect the person after them. However, allow yourself to change settings. If the ebbs and flows of showing at a con make it so there are fewer people, you might want to go in and change the length of your demo if it's set up for that. You might want to adjust the volume or whatever. So be able to backdoor into it yourself, but don't let players do it. Highlight the best parts of your game. Even if your game features a ton of content, show only the content to the general public, at least when exhibiting somewhere big. That is the best part. Tumblestone had a ton of different game modes, but like our puzzle race game mode was the one that got people screaming at each other. It got people coming back and bringing in their friends, and that's the only game mode that we showed, despite having it just being a tiny little piece of the game. Similarly, make sure it's not too advanced. The game, it should be the part of your game that is the simplest to learn, hopefully. If you have to have a 3 or 4 minute tutorial, you're probably already dead in the water at PAX. And like I said earlier, having a well-defined end to the game so that you don't have to awkwardly be like, all right, that's been 10 minutes. It's time for you to stop and let the person behind you go. And you're like, okay, that's the end of the demo after 3 or 4 minutes. Move on and let this person who's been waiting and have the demo immediately reset. Also, because you're not going to necessarily always be able to be there at your station to reset the demo, if someone drops the controller and it's been 30 seconds or so, just have the demo reset itself or replace that controller with a bot or whatever applicable for your game. And most importantly, for the love of God, have a stable build. You don't want to be in the nightmarish situation where your game crashes and maybe you're just stuck showing your trailer on a loop at PAX, because I've seen that before, and it's so sad to see that developer do that. And have a backup, even if it's weeks old and doesn't have those shiny new features that you've just added. If it works, it works, so at least carry a backup on hand. Demos are very hard, and it's important to take care of yourself. First and foremost, invest in insoles. You're going to be standing a lot, both at the convention and at after parties. If you can afford it, buy the nice padded, cushiony carpet at PAX that feels like you're standing on clouds. I made the mistake of buying these incredibly fashionable Tumblestone shoes, which is part of being always on brand. But it's really hard to stand in these custom printed Chucks. I both recommend and not recommend custom printing your own Chucks. Bring way more than you need of water, energy drinks, snacks. Pack your own lunch. Don't take time out of your day to go out for lunch. Just bring a sandwich in a bag. Plenty of lozenges because you'll be talking constantly. I've gotten pretty good at it. And plenty of hand sanitizer. Paxpox is a real thing. You'll probably get sick. I always do. And hopefully your team size is long enough and you have people helping you out enough that you can take breaks. It's pretty important. So after doing all of this for Tumblestone over 3 years, going all over the place to demo constantly, was it worth it? For Tumblestone, I think it was, and I'll explain why. It's what I call the interest feedback loop. So it starts taking your relatively unknown game. In Tumblestone's case, right when we started it, no one knew what it was at all. But we showed it, we brought in players, and the game was captivating enough that players or people at PAX or wherever saw people playing and having a good time and wanted to check that out. But press are actually people too. They're humans who were like walking down an expo hall and saying, oh, this game over here looks kind of deserted. No one seems too interested in it. And people over here are literally screaming and jumping up and down. I'm going to go check out the ladder because that looks interesting. And your industry contracts, your platform representatives, your publishers are the exact same way. So just having a mass of people at your booth is going to draw these important people to your booth as well, which can lead to articles and platform deals. And similarly, press articles will lead to having platform deals. If platforms are like, wow, they're getting all of this press, I'm going to check this out. And vice versa. Just being on platforms will give you press. Being on platforms will bring you more players, and having press will bring you players as well, because if someone's walking down PAX, they're like, oh, I saw this Destructoid article about this game. I remember this. Yeah, this looks cool. This is something that you need to do over and over again by exhibiting over and over again. It's interest breeding more interest, but kind of having this constant reinforcement of exhibiting over and over again kind of creates this loop and makes your attention to your game really start snowballing. In Tumblestone's case, this is exactly why I think demoing constantly was successful, is because one of those platform representatives was Microsoft, and they became very interested to it. From what I know, basically everyone at ID at Xbox was so into the game, they set it up in their offices and played it all the time and took it to conventions themselves, and we ended up getting a Games with Gold deal, which, because of NDAs, I can't tell you what it was worth, but it made the game profitable at day one, and we wouldn't have had that if we didn't do all of this expo circuit. Of course, there are drawbacks. For one, it's fucking exhausting. Demoing is really hard on a human, especially doing it all the time. It was probably a third of my job for 3 years was just preparing for expos, traveling to expos, and doing this. It's not cheap. For Tumblestone, we spent about $60,000 US dollars, about 80,000 Canadian, just going, traveling, hotels, the cost of the booth itself, supplies. And I know to the extent that we did it, it's not really in most indie budgets, but maybe we got lucky getting these platform deals, but I'm still glad we did it. And I guess this is my opinion. It's still kind of testing it as I go, but the more you build a reputation for yourself, especially, and start making all of these platform contacts and having this press list, I think the less effective demoing becomes. I don't regret at all spending 3 years demoing Tumbostone constantly. But I'm still kind of deciding if I'm going to do it in the future, because now I can just like email Microsoft or Nintendo or whatever with what I need, or email these press people. But I've spent years accumulating this and doing this work, so I'm not really quite sure if it's still worth it for someone who already has an established game to be demoing, interestingly enough. So just finally, as a takeaway, if you're a relatively unknown game and or studio, it's hugely beneficial to exhibit constantly and all the time. But only do that if you have something worth showing. And again, it kind of goes back to the size of your audience. If it's like a 200 person or less attendance, then show whatever. Who cares? Spend a week on it, show it there. But if your game isn't necessarily remarkable, don't spend thousands and thousands of dollars on a single show for what might not end up attracting people to your booth or having that kind of player excitement. But if you choose to exhibit, do it often, because having this interest feedback loop where interest is breeding more interest, it only really works if you start doing this all the time. And finally, hopefully this goes without saying, but absolutely make the most of it. If you start to exhibit, decorate your booth, spend a little bit more just on decorations if you can, refine your demo. Don't be afraid to talk to press. Don't be afraid to talk to players as they come by. For me personally, that was like the biggest struggle, was just even after spending all this money and traveling and setting up the booth, just like talking to another human who was walking by, is like, hey, do you want to try my game? That was the hardest part, and that's just stupid, but like I eventually had to force myself to do it, and it ended up working, I think. Any questions?